Hi, my name's Dave Williamson. I'm here in the offices and the studio at Discover Worship, and I've been asked to come in and just share a few words on a subject that is near and dear to my heart, which is the worship leading choir. I know that a lot of you who are watching this video lead choirs. Some of you have never led a choir, and a few of you are wondering whether or not the choir might or might not be relevant for the church today as it exists. And so I want to talk to you just a little bit about why I think it is. I've just written a book called God's Singers, and this book is sort of my magnum opus. It's a distillation of 40 years of ministry in music, but I don't know, people who know me think that I'm 61 going on 35, and I think that's true. My approach to the choir is not necessarily the approach that you've seen or that you've experienced all your life. One of the quotes from the book, as a matter of fact, says, this is from the preface, says, "Some of the thoughts presented in the next 31 chapters don't fit into any widely taught study of how to be or to do a church choir. Actually, some are quite radical. But these are radical times, and if new life is to be breathed into the choir, perhaps a new approach is called for. I hope much of what we discuss here will rattle your cage at least a little. Put on your Man from Mars glasses with me." Okay. Here's what happened to me. Back in the early 1990s, I was in a position of helping to plant a church, and here in Nashville. And I remember that and I don't know if you've ever planted a church before, but it's the best of times and the worst of times, like Dickens says at the beginning of A Tale of Two Cities. It's the best part of it is you get to do everything the way you've always wanted to do it, and the worst part of it is you have to do it all yourself. So we were talking about what we're going to do in planting this church. And the man who was to become the pastor of the church leaned over to me and he said, "Dave, would you be our worship leader?" Well, you would have thought as a musician, that would have come up before now, but it hadn't. And I'm not proud of the answer that I gave him. I said, "No, I won't." And he said, "Well, why?" And I said, because for those two reasons. Number one, this is Nashville and there's a worship leader on every street corner. And number two, I know from having been at churches where you've been the pastor before, that face-to-face encounters with God in worship are going to be a primary core value of any church that you pastor. And I don't know how to do that. That's not part of my tradition. So I would just want to sit in the congregation and learn with everybody else. Well, he said that thing that pastors so often say that's maddening. Would you pray about it? When has anybody ever asked you that and you've said no? So I didn't say no either, and much to my surprise, a couple of weeks later I came back to him and I said, "I think God is saying that's going to be okay, that he's going to cover for me." And so for the next 6 years, I was in the best place in ministry that I've ever been in, flat on my face before God, because I knew that in leading the worship of this church, that if the Spirit of God did not, as we say it colloquially, show up and help to energize and initiate worship of the Father through whoever we were, that we were going to crash and burn because I didn't know how to do this. One of the key ingredients in determining how the worship life of that church was going to go was deciding whether or not we were going to have a choir. And the key question occurred to me, and the question is the choir man's idea or is the choir God's idea? Because if the choir is a man's idea, I think we can just turn the page and go on to whatever's next. But if the choir is God's idea, not so fast. So I could take another 45 minutes, like I sometimes do when I'm teaching this, and go through all kinds of scripture to prove to you the ultimate realization that came to me after several weeks of study. And that is, the choir is God's idea. So that being the case, maybe we better come to a screeching halt in our plans to dismantle choirs everywhere, but figure out how to do the choir God's way. The choir does not exist, I've discovered, to do the things that I had always expected it to do, to be a group of people who were sort of bored and maybe boring, and sat up in the choir loft and only really came alive in the service when it was time to sing the anthem they'd been rehearsing really hard, and otherwise just kind of checking out. But in fact, the choir is one of God's worship leaders. As such, it really makes a huge difference in how we approach the choir, and how we think about the choir, and how we do the choir, in order to allow it to be the worship leader that God has called it to be. A choir can make sense in almost any musical context, although I know that a lot of us don't think that it can because we've never heard it be that. Again, forgive me, Reggie, for this, but I do want to point you toward this book because there's a 75-minute music CD at the end of it that has rehearsal techniques to get your choir to sing rock and roll or or black gospel or whatever style of music that is appropriate for your church. But I want to encourage you, if you are leading a choir, and you're in the same place that I've been for much of my life, standing in front of a group of people and attempting to bring them to a place of reality and relevance in your church, whether your church is made up of 20-somethings or whether your church is gray and grizzled. Either way, the choir makes sense, and I want to encourage you to consider the ministry of a choir. God bless you.